Arsenal are in crisis, according to the media and a large portion of their fan base. Despite the necessary time and money, Arsene Wenger did not sign a striker or even a single outfielder this summer, so now Arsenal have been left with Giroud and kind of Welbeck, Sanchez, Joel Campbell and Theo Walcott. This is the narrative surrounding Arsenal at the moment, but I think I agree with Arsene Wenger's decision not to sign a striker this summer. I know like 95% of you aren't going to agree with that, but before you call me an arse in the comments, at least wait it out. See if I can change your opinion in the end, or at least I hope this video is a little bit thoughtful and gets you thinking in a different way. If we want to try and evaluate how good a striker, how good Olivier Giroud is, it might make sense to first look at goal totals, but goal totals are misleading. Including penalties arbitrarily awards just the player that's taking a penalty, as opposed to any other player in the team who could have taken that penalty instead, even if there is a variability in penalty taking skill there. So for example, if I score 7 out of 10 of my penalties and you score 8 out of 10 of your penalties, but I am the designated penalty taker of our team, then I am going to get, if we get 10 penalties a season, 7 more goals than you do in a particular season, which is a completely arbitrary way of saying who's scored the most goals, who's created this goal output. Penalties are scored at around a 76% rate as opposed to 11% for all other shots, so really if we're going to make fair comparisons between players, we shouldn't include them in goal totals. Secondly, you need to take into account how much time a player is actually on the pitch. If I score 10 goals in 40 games in a season and you score 9 goals in 20 games, sure, I've scored more goals, but for the time that you're on the pitch, you are contributing more goals than I am. Goals aren't necessarily the best measure of a player's attacking output, but at least non-penalty goals per 90 minutes is a fairer comparison than just goals. So how many goals do we want our striker to score? You often hear the term 20 goals a season striker. Let's take out Messi and Ronaldo because obviously they're not in the Arsenal transfer equation, and we're left with only 3 players last season who managed to get 20 non-penalty goals, only 4 players in the season before that who managed to get 20 non-penalty goals, and no players in the top 5 European leagues in the last 2 seasons, apart from Messi and Ronaldo obviously, managed to get 20 non-penalty goals in both seasons. Griezmann, Neymar and Aguero managed it last season. Suarez, Costa, Immobile and Sturridge managed it the season before that. Griezmann is already at a club with more recent success than Arsenal and is a transfer target for teams that can easily push Arsenal aside financially. Neymar, Suarez, Aguero and Costa are obviously not going to happen, either they're playing for Barcelona or direct Premier League rivals with a lot more money. Immobile did poorly last season at Dortmund and Sturridge spends more time taking pictures with rappers than he does on a football pitch. Olivier Giroud actually scored at a higher rate last season than many of what's often considered to be the world's elite strikers. In fact, he didn't even score any penalties, which makes his record look even more impressive. Thanks to Squawker for the graphics and Leitra and Rajai for the idea that I've completely ripped off. So I'd argue that in relative terms, Olivier Giroud is actually a pretty good finisher. But as I said earlier, goals aren't the only important part of a striker's game. In fact, they might not even be the most important part. A little over a year ago, I made a video saying that Falcao wouldn't do well at Manchester United, that got a lot of abuse at the time and now I'm quite smug about, because there was a clear pattern in his numbers, his goals were going down, they were hugely boosted by penalties, his shots were going down, etc. But there was a more subtle point there. I now hugely regret my tone in that video. Not really the points I made, but there is something I wish I emphasised a little bit more. It wasn't necessarily that Falcao was bad, it's that I thought that without Falcao, teams wouldn't be that much worse. In fact, they might even be a little bit better. So it's not a problem necessarily that Falcao is so fantastic with his head, and I'm not saying that he wasn't a brilliant header of the ball. He was, and he probably still is, but crossing is a tactic that's associated with teams that aren't particularly fantastic. You don't see Barcelona and Real Madrid putting in a really high number of crosses in a game because it's quite a wasteful tactic. So even if Falcao is really good with his head, if as a team you're having to put in loads of crosses to try and support his attacking output, to try and get him those headers, then you're probably going to detract from your game in other areas. And so even if the player individually is fantastic, without him, and therefore without the tactic for the team is arguably a little bit better. At Porto, when he left, they arguably got better without him, or at least didn't get worse. Atleti went on to much better things without him. Colombia did amazing things at the World Cup without Falcao, and at Monaco and Manchester United, he didn't exactly perform amazingly. What I'm trying to get at is that it doesn't necessarily matter how many goals a striker scores, it matters how many more goals the team scores when they're on the pitch. These ideas are maybe extremely similar, but I think there is a little bit of nuance there that captures the modern understanding of a striker in football. If I score 2 goals in a game and our team wins 2-0, that's pretty good, right? But if you would have scored 1 goal in that same game and we would have won 3-0, I'd argue that's actually a better, not worse performance. Individual brilliance in football, in my opinion, is too often confused with easily countable output. And does Giroud offer more than just goals? Does he hold up play well? Does he build up play well? And does he generally have a positive effect on the team when he is on the pitch? I think the common opinion is yes, and his goal impact score agrees. Goal impact is a heavily adjusted Shapley value measuring a player's contribution to goal difference relative to all other players. It's great, but I won't talk about it too much today. If you have a question, write me in the comments below. That was my attempt at arguing Giroud is actually pretty good as a starting striker, but let's now talk about the other options that Arsenal had this summer. If you're Arsenal, you have limited resources. Sure, a large transfer kitty, but limited resources nonetheless. Arsenal have over £200 million of cash in the bank, which is way more than other Premier League clubs, but after you take away net debt, debt servicing reserve, etc., it looks like they have a little bit more than maybe 100 million to spend this window. Swiss Variable did an amazing analysis on it, which I'll link in the description below. An expensive £60 million mistake means you'll probably be worse in 5 years' time than you would have been without that mistake. Spunking your resources on crap will make you lose the financial advantages you once had. I'm absolutely not saying this means that you shouldn't spend, but it means that Arsenal face financial realities and shouldn't just spend money for the sake of spending money. You're never going to be able to come close to Manchester United, Manchester City and Chelsea spending in the short or even long term. So shout at Arsene Wenger all you like, but signing a striker, a star striker this summer probably would have been a bad decision. The most expensive strikers this summer window were Martial, Benteke, Jackson Martinez, Dybala, Baka and Negredo. Martial's been great, if a little bit lucky this season, but he's too expensive a bet for Arsenal to have made. Benteke at 33 million, considering his shot numbers, is not something you want at a Champions League club. Jackson Martinez is getting very old very quickly and is a little bit of an unknown. Dybala probably wouldn't have fit in with Arsenal's system, and again, a little bit of an unknown. Carlos Baka is getting old quickly and his numbers don't look fantastic, and Negredo wanted to go to Valencia. Considering what we've spoken about before, I think you could just about argue that none of them would start above Olivier Giroud, but if that's too far for you, like, completely fair enough, but still we've got to think about the marginal benefit of signing them, not just how good they are. What matters when spending limited financial resources is not necessarily how absolutely good they are, but how much impact they will have on the team. If Chelsea kept Petr Cech and signed De Gea last season, sure, De Gea is a fantastic footballer in absolute terms, but he probably wouldn't have been a very good signing because he doesn't represent something much better than Courtois or Cech at Chelsea. Whereas if for half the price they bought a fantastic right back to replace Ivanovic, sure, he might not be as absolutely good as De Gea is, but he probably would have been a better signing. Given Arsenal's financial context, would 40 million spent on one of the strikers we spoke about earlier really be more useful to the team than 40 million spent on a centre-back and a defensive midfielder? If you think yes, we're going to have to agree to disagree. Outside of them, there's Benzema, who if Madrid don't want to sell, is definitely not coming for any feasible price. Ibrahimovic, let's not even go there. Thomas Müller, who's not going to join Manchester United. Cavani, a declining and limited footballer playing for a team who are essentially exempt from any financial or political reality. Higuain, still good, but half the player since leaving Real Madrid. Lacazette, who has one good but very lucky season in France behind him, and in the short term is committed to Lyon. Dzeko, who has question marks surrounding him about age and whether he'd join Arsenal over Roma, but maybe him and Jovetic would have worked as signings. But again, are they improvements over Olivier Giroud? Very possibly not. That's different from whether a Jovetic would have improved the squad. I think he would have, but we're only talking about starting strikers here. This season so far, Arsenal have been a little bit unlucky. It's very early on, but at the moment they're posting extremely impressive attacking shot numbers and are conceding impressively low numbers of shots. Their expected goal numbers, which have been shown to predict future performances far better than current goals or points, are good. Given the number and the quality of the shots that they're taking, and that very few players manage to significantly deviate from their expected goal numbers over a reasonable sample, you would have expected Arsenal to probably have scored more and maybe conceded less so far this season. Given what we know about finishing, Arsenal will probably start to convert a higher proportion of their chances soon. It seems like the Leicester 5-2 game was an inevitable result. 6.6% is what they're currently at, which was even lower before the Leicester game, and you'd expect them to move closer to the general 11% mark or even higher than that. There are very strong reasons to think that Arsenal have maybe been a little bit, quote-unquote, unlucky this season. And there are also good reasons, to come back to before, to think that spending money in a football team doesn't necessarily correlate to greater success. Thanks to Michael Cayley, Elf Taken Elf, and Omar Chowdhury for the graphics. Again, links in the description. So maybe all the hysteria surrounding Arsenal strikers is a little bit unnecessary. Even though he has a pretty good injury record, eventually this video will look a little bit redundant as Giroud ages, but I hope you found it fun, analytical, and maybe even a little bit insightful. Please bear in mind that this is not a defense of Arsene Wenger. It's kind of, but it's not even really a defense of Arsenal's attacking lineup. Could Arsenal have reasonably improved their attacking lineup this summer? Probably. Could Arsenal have signed a player, reasonably an outfielder, who would have made a significant impact on the team? Almost certainly, without doubt. This video is only supposed to be a defense of Olivier Giroud, and more generally, Arsene Wenger's decision not to sign a star striker this summer. I imagine a lot of you will have a lot to say on this topic, so let's chat in the comments below. If you enjoyed, a like on this video goes a long way. Subscribe for more. My social media links are in the description below, and I'll catch you later.